Hello, and welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Palladino.
Today, we're continuing our CXO series where we're not talking to the executive leaders of the companies, but people who are responsible for driving great digital experiences and how they get executive buy-in to deliver better digital experiences. Today, we're joined by an expert in UI and UX, Catering Gignac, who is our representative for continuous experience optimization in our CXO series. Now, Catherine is the Director of Digital Experience Design at American Eagle Outfitters, where she's worked for the last 14 years. She currently leads a team of UX UI designers and is responsible for ensuring their digital products are on brand, user first, and meeting the needs of both their customers and the business. She's the perfect fit for our topic today on continuous experience optimization, so we're pleased to have her. Catherine, welcome to the Frictionless Experience.
Hi, thank you guys. Happy to be here.
We're excited to have you as a guest. Now, before we talk about your role at American Eagle, you're also a professional coach and helping lead people through career and personal transitions. And
That's
as
true.
part of that work, you lead groups of people on trips all over the world, right?
Yeah, I sure do.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about that work and what are a few of the favorite places you visited?
Oh gosh, good question. That's my favorite thing to talk about. Yeah, I started a kind of travel retreat business back in 2019. It's called The Retreat. It is meant to bring people together in community through collective movement and adventure and wellness rituals. So we've been to Iceland. We're going back there for our second time this year. We're going to go to the Swiss Alps in 2025. And then like the mainstay go-to that I do every year, sometimes twice a year, is take a pretty large group down to Tulum in Mexico, which is like just the perfect place to really get people out of their day-to-day. It's not so far from the United States. You can go for 5 nights, but it's enough time to like detach from whatever's going on at home, whatever's going on at work, and refocus and center on yourself. So that all started from a side hustle I was doing aside from my corporate career as a yoga instructor, but then it became less about the yoga and more about community building and like that coaching, getting, deeper back into the clarity and getting rid of some of the fogginess that we all collect when we sit in front of our computers for too long. So yeah, that's kind of really where my passion outside of my 9 to 5 lies.
I think we can all relate to that fogginess. Holy
Yep.
cow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everybody
awesome.
needs it. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. So tell us a little bit more about your role at American Eagle Outfitters and what you and your team are focused on these days.
Yeah, totally. Your intro was great. I am exactly what you said, leading a team of UX UI designers. I've been doing that for about 10 years now at AE. I started kind of in this UX UI space when we redesigned the front end of our website in 2015 for the first time really ever. We started it from a blank sheet of paper on mine and a colleague's screen. And so ever since then, we've been growing the UX UI design team. I'm ultimately responsible for the visual design or experience design of all the digital channels, our apps, our international franchises. We consult to make sure that those are up to brand standards. And of course, AE.com and Aerie.com are our primary channels. So it's been a really, really fun time to kind of just like see the internet and the industry grow and change from one specific role in one specific company, and see how that's actually like changed my job over the course of time too, because it's not stayed the same, but the job and the role really have.
So you said the phrase experience design.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot more to that than just in passing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what does that really mean when you're talking about the digital space? You're designing the experience, obviously, but how do you come together to create something that actually is experience design rather than just designing a feature?
Aren't we all always trying to figure that out? I think it's a huge evolution, especially when you work in a really, really large organization where you've got an entire massive digital team. You're supporting 2 brands, not just one brand, and then numerous channels. So how do you take any challenge that we may have at hand, which at any given time in a company like American Eagle, we have a huge product and development org. So my team is really looking constantly across our entire ecosystem to make sure that what project manager number 1 wants to do over here and project manager number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 want to do over here are all gonna cohesively work together, that we're still creating a seamless experience. When people are looking at pieces of the pie, we're trying to make sure we're looking at the holistic journey. And what I always say, and I know we'll probably talk a lot about today, is the secret sauce to working, I think, in a digital design space, in a lifestyle brand, a brand that's slightly a different nut to crack than an Amazon or, a big box digital store, is that you've got that brand element. So I've really found that in order to be successful in experience design, you really have to be able to do 3 things really well. You have to be a good UX UI designer. That's obvious, but you have to understand the brand DNA, what is on brand and what's not, what's considered elevated within that brand space and what's not. How do you define the word elevate to someone who isn't a creative, who isn't on the brand side, and get them to buy into that word and the importance behind elevating. And then also being able to understand as a designer the business need, the business case, and taking all 3 of those kind of areas of expertise, putting them on a scale and making sure they're balanced at the end of the day. So it is the end user's experience, right? But we're also looking at, how does this experience impact our internal teams? We can't just build anything we want. How does this experience impact our brand perception? There's so many things to weigh into when we're looking at how we design an experience. To your point, it's not just like make thing A function as this. It's so much,
Right.
More holistic than that.
And something in there that you kind of talked about was really understanding your own experiences. And that's something that I did at Home Depot a lot that helped me succeed significantly, and most specifically the special buy of the day. And it's because I was my own customer, and that gave me my own context that would help me elevate above just thinking about, hey, what are the numbers telling me today? And what is this saying about the experience, and how do I go figure out what I need to do today? Because I'm now feeling the pain of my customers or feeling the joy of my customers by being my own customer. And it's something that I really like hearing coming from the experience side as well, because that's really the tip of the spear is the experience design. And I'm going to keep saying that now. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's really funny. We have like an internal joke that, like, you find your biggest UX problems usually when your executives are looking at a new feature for the first time. Like, they always catch the bugs first. Or like, I know my team feels like, oh, how did Catherine catch that? That's so annoying. She caught it before us. But it's like, it's true. You're your own end user also, if you're properly placed in your job. And that's one of the reasons I've stayed at American Eagle and Aerie for what most millennials would perceive as an insanely long time, 14 years, like you said. And like, it's because I care about the brands, and I'm a customer of Aerie. I really believe, like, I usually am wearing Aerie all the time. So it's one of those things where I want the experience to be good for me and for my friends who are shopping it, and also for the millions of other people who are shopping it too.
You and my wife both. She loves Aerie.
Okay, good.
Loves it.
We love to hear that. Yeah.
Oh, it's her favorite brand by like a mile.
I love it. I have a lot of good friends who also love to hear that. It's funny how Aerie itself is such an interesting nut, like, just to tangent us for a second, because those anecdotal, like, my wife loves, or, a group of us were out to dinner last weekend, and the hostess was wearing like a head to toe Aerie set on like a Saturday night. And so the fact that we can go from like a workout set to this is what the hostess was wearing, and she wasn't even necessarily our core demographic. Like, we're spanning this like very wide age range of women, and they're wearing it to work. They're wearing it to work out. And it's not always on, you walk through the mall and you think, oh, American Eagle and Aerie are these specialty teen retailers. And it's really a lot more broad than that. So that's another thing that ties a lot into the experience design is we've got a core demographic, but we also have a very, very large population that you can't categorize into one persona or even 10 personas. And we need to design for everybody. So your wife included.
Exactly. And it's funny because she'll bring me to an Aerie store every now and then she's like over there walking around like, I feel like I shouldn't be here. And I'm like, no, it's fine. It's fine. I shouldn't be here, but it's fine that you're here.
We want everyone to feel comfortable in our stores. We really do. Yeah, it's really cool. It's a great brand to work for. And to just see it continue to grow and be part of that growth digitally has been what's kept me coming back for more every day. So,
And Nick, I'm picturing you have a garage or a basement full of Home Depot buy of the day items because you're buying one every day to test.
I wasn't buying them every day, but I was certainly shopping to make sure that I didn't miss something great. And speaking of, I do have a special buy of the day toilet in my garage right now that is yet to be installed.
That sounds like a whole nother story.
the buy of the
So,
day feature is not something I've ever used on Home Depot, I have to admit, but now I'm going
Oh,
to have
you
to
got
go
to
check it
try it.
out because I am
As-
a Home Depot girly.
oh, it's so great,
Okay.
especially air filter day. Air filter day is the day you stock up on air filters, and they're all discounted like 40%. So you
Okay,
gotta
well,
you gotta
next time
pay
that
attention to air filter
happens, you're
day.
going to need to tap me. I need some air filters. Okay, that sounds
Consider
good.
it done.
Great.
Consider it done.
Great.
so,
Oh,
Catherine, when
God.
we talked on our prep call, you had a great story of how you moved from graphic design to UX because you were one of the few
Yeah.
people in the department to care deeply about analytics. How has the journey and the thought process allowed you to evolve and think of the business from multiple viewpoints?
Oh my gosh. I mean, you couldn't go to school in 2014 for what we would consider modern day UX or product management. I mean, they existed. There's like definitely programs out there that existed. But I think what's interesting about our generation of people in product and product design is that we're a little bit self taught, or we've really transitioned from, different, more traditional marketing or design or commercial background. So I did start out in marketing at American Eagle doing like web design content, email design content, seasonality stuff, right? Lifestyle images, coffee, layout. And we didn't have a UX UI team. So it was always interesting when someone would come down from our digital team and say, like, hey, do you want to test the color of a button? The very first test I ever remember running in my career was like, let's turn the place order and the add to bag buttons from black to purple to orange and see what happens. And this was right when, Amazon came out with the big yellow button and we were all like, okay, let's see. And that was a really pivotal moment for me because the person proposing that test didn't have a brand affinity or an aesthetic affinity. It was my job to kind of maintain the confines and I like to use I like to keep it in the dam. Like I like to keep the dam closed, if you will, on like what's in brand and what's good for us. And I remember we had a big fight about the color orange because it wasn't on brand. It's still not on brand. You won't see an orange button on our site, but we have since done plenty of button tests, plenty of color tests. But that was the first one. And I really did love being validated, right? That, my instinct, like after you take out orange is out of brand, so that's not even going to be its color we're going to test, or maybe we'll test it, but we agree that we're never going to put it into production because it is off brand, but let's learn about it. We don't do that very often. I like to test things that we would feel good about. And then, you either are validated or you're not validated. And that's kind of the world we're living in right now with this continuous optimization of like right now we're running 6 tests on the site and I mean they all launched within the last 48 hours, but right now there's a lot of positive numbers in there. I might log on Monday and they may have flipped to negatives, but it's cool to come into work every day and check and see like, hey, how are my instincts lining up with how users are shopping, and then parsing that against what qualitatively are users telling us, because half the time they'll say one thing, I like it when you guys show us this, but then their money will actually show the opposite. And so putting quantitative and qualitative testing against each other is sometimes a big hot topic as well.
Yeah, no kidding. There have been so many of those where you do focus groups and they go, "Oh yeah, I would buy diet products at Taco Bell," and then when you put it
And
out in the
it,
market, nobody actually buys it, right? They're actually buying the
Exactly.
extra large 3,000 calorie option. Um,
Exactly.
so, so how do you think about or define friction within the UX experience?
That's a really good question. We're always trying to look primarily at, what's our RPV going to be at the end of the day? That doesn't necessarily mean that every experience is designed to improve RPV. That's just our sort of like first gut check is like, we don't want to do anything that's going to probably bring in less business for us. But what we find is that those two things go hand in hand. When we create a more seamless experience, when we remove friction points, usually that makes it easier for the customer to shop. And so we like to really tie those ideas together. We're always doing competitive analyses. We're always doing our own shopping. Like you guys said, like you're the core. When you work in e-commerce, you also do a lot of e-commerce shopping. And so there's always new and interesting ways to look at core shopping modalities. If those of us in the industry know the nuances and the ins and outs of what makes an e-commerce site or an app a really good e-commerce app. What gets interesting is when people put tests out there that really start to like shake things up a little bit and do break conventions. And you don't see that a lot in our space, but when it happens, everyone notices, for good or bad, but it does like require you to change the shopping behavior. As a customer the other day, I went to the Uniqlo website and they put their entire navigation in a search icon at the bottom of the screen. There was no top nav, there was no side nav. And I literally had to use their onboarding functionality to learn how to search their site. This was desktop. I just looked at it and my jaw was like, how do I find anything? I kept clicking. And so it's probably a test, but it's fascinating because they're trying something really radical, right? And it's interesting. E-commerce has become so standardized. You know where to find the search bar. You know where to find the navigation. You know where the filters are going to be. You know where the add to bag button is going to be. So when you run across something in the wild or internally in-house, you do something really, really radical, it's often met with a lot of resistance, right? And so I think there are two paths when we're looking at frictionless experiences. Like, let's not reinvent the wheel is one path. How do we make what we already have better? How do we modernize it? How do we simplify it? How do we make sure that when we're designing something, if we're going to design it, it's got to be, if there's a modal being popped up, we want to look at it on a phone, prototyped before we hand it off to a developer, because too many pop-ups. How do you know where the keyboard's going to pop? Like, those are the things that I really get into with my team is like, we have to look at every single step on those complicated experiences. So make sure we really know, like, once it's in our hands, like, okay, we know exactly what's going to pop where and at what point on the screen. Mobile's so hard to get it right on because it's such a small space, that we really put a lot of time and energy into making really, really, really technical decisions in that regard. And then sometimes we have fun and we go like a completely different path and we say, what's blue sky? What's a big radical idea over here of something that we might want to try? And a lot of times we'll end up in the middle, right? Like, we'll start something like a small optimization and it'll lead to a bigger idea. Not so radical usually, because we really are like not trying to reinvent what online shopping is, but we're trying to create new and move forward experiences within the existing paradigms of digital shopping that's become second nature to so many people.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the Uniqlo example, because we had Jeffrey Colon on from Dell, and he was talking about we ended up talking about how, back in the early days there were no accepted standards, and we tried a bunch of different things. And I gave an example of one of the first websites when I was working in an agency. That one of the first websites we did as a stadium because we thought that'd be kind of cool. But nobody would know how to navigate. It's so interesting because there's that fine line between, we've got to try some things because you never know what, Amazon had to try one-click buy at some point, right? When they were the first to do that. And right. So on the one hand, it could be a game changer. On the other hand, like Uniqlo, it could create so much friction that people don't know how to shop. So how do you kind of balance that? How do you decide what things to experiment and what not to experiment?
Well, it's interesting. In a world before A/B testing, or even before like A/B testing culture became really prevalent at American Eagle, we would look at one thing and it was like, we're just going to do whatever we land on. So there would be emotional debate, right, around the one thing. With A/B testing culture and continuous optimization culture, you don't have to be so precious. One of my leaders, David Zhang, he joined American Eagle in the last year, And he has really transformed the culture of A/B testing everything. So for me, when it's not even a business case, when it's just like, Catherine, do you want to make the logo 50 pixels bigger? We're going to test it. Like, that is very different, very radical thinking, but it's become something we've really adopted. So we'll test just aesthetic things now. We'll test as a deal breaker, like a tiebreaker, like Nick, you and I, we can't decide. We both have a very high level of care about this. Let's just A/B test both. We don't have to be so precious. And then we'll learn from that. And that's been really good for me because I've been in the same role for so long that I'm very, very protective of the brand. And like, oh God, they're like, we would never do that. For me, I've really had to be like, okay, well, yeah, even if we maybe used to think that's a radical idea, we can at least test it now and learn. And so it does take some of like the scariness out of it for making a final call, for making a decision. There's less tech debt. But how do we choose, to answer your question more specifically? We have as most companies, I'm sure, like a miles long backlog of ideas that come from everywhere in our digital business. And we just prioritize them based on what we think could really be needle moving. And every week we're moving things up and down that backlog list and, really kind of coming to the table to see how we can optimize a little bit on each page at all times. So like right now we're running a PDP page and a PLP page and a home page and a top nav test and a bag test. And they're all running simultaneously, but not impacting each other because they're on different pages. So we're able to get numerous work streams moving in that testing space and see how they do.
So you had mentioned a change that was really small, 50 pixels on the logo. How do you balance decisions like that probably, and I'm making my own assumption here, probably would never impact conversion or anything at like a business level, but it will impact something more like a brand presence level?
Yeah,
How are you
that's it.
balancing those two aspects?
So that logo test was a real conversation, but because it wasn't going to be super needle moving, most likely is the assumption, it's probably
Right.
the lowest thing on the list right now. And it actually kind of like fell off the table as a conversation because bigger things came to the table, right? So let me try to think of a better example. We are really trying to focus on tests that aren't doing. What did you ask me again?
How do you balance changes that are about building the brand presence
Yeah,
and the look and feel of AE versus driving
driving. Yeah, okay.
conversions?
We're trying to pair both together because it's so impossible to keep up with the internet. Like, and we would need to triple the size of our team to just be able to do only brand moving forward modernizations and also business tests. So what we try to do is we use this like lifting the hood of the car analogy all the time where, hey, we just redesigned an entirely newly organized order summary for our bag and checkout pages. Great. We haven't had the opportunity to touch that previously for 2 years. So it's a very old looking design. We've really moved the style guide forward. We're going to add new style guide to move that section forward with this test and kind of package it in there. So it's not really a variable in the test in most cases.
Interesting.
We do have other tests where, so we're not to the point right quite yet where we're doing a lot of like content testing. But there are definitely conversations around testing different copy for different placements and things like that. And that is, I know, we do it in some capacities. I don't want to be too specific, but we are always looking at opportunities of like testing features and functions of the site, testing brand moments on the site, testing promo messaging and copy. There's like so many different ways that we break it down. And I think I'm having a hard time answering your question because there's nothing on AE.com, not one word or one pixel that we don't consider branded. So
Interesting.
everything in and of itself is branded. And so even though we have two brands that sit there, each in a tab, my team's job owning the UI style guide is that the UI style guide and design system is literally like a shell that either and both brands can sit in at all times. Which is so different than like a lot of tech houses where it's like, well, of course, the design system is the style of the tech, but this is like two brands sit in this design system. And everything we consider branded, every word.
So if you came to a point, this is totally hypothetical, but we're having some fun here. If you came to the point where the orange button showed a 5% improvement to whatever you're trying to do, how do you say no to that decision? Because it's off.
Okay, great. That's a lot of my job. So a lot of my job, because I used to be a graphic designer in the marketing department, I have really close relationships with both of our CMOs and all of our VPs of brand and our creative directors. And I keep those maintain those relationships because now that I'm more in the digital and tech space, if I get challenged to say like, let's just try orange, and I can say, I know that our brand teams aren't going to be aligned with that. So my first tactic would be to try to not get it tested at all. Like that's not on brand. We can't go there because you know it's not going to fly. If it's going to get tested, then we'll test it, and I'll kind of work with our marketing partners to say we're going to test and learn this. It's going to go to X% of traffic for X number of days, but we won't push it to production unless we have a conversation with you first. And we haven't really gotten to that point. We usually don't test things that aren't on brand. And that's a huge part of my job because having moved from the marketing team into the design to the digital and tech space, it's been a very interesting learning. I've always kind of sat in between. It doesn't matter what team my team is on the paper. I've always sort of been the bridge communicator between the two organizations, and the brand people understand brand, right? Communicating brand and aesthetic and what's elevated and what's not, and what's quality UI and what's not, to technical partners is actually a lot harder. It's like explaining tech to brand people. It's hard. So that's where I really try to be able to speak both languages and teach my team to be able to speak both languages so that we can really be that like voice of explanation in layman's terms for each department to say like brand matters. This is why. So we're going to put some confines around, you know, orange or, hey, hey, brand team, we really think there might be something needle moving if we tried something this way, and it normally wouldn't be perceived as on brand, but it's my job as like the middleman to basically take every digital challenge and get it as on brand as I possibly can. And then we would have a conversation if it's still not feeling good to me. But that's basically how I see the importance of my role is like, whatever we do, whatever we see out there from anyone, whether they're a competitor or not, that's maybe inspiring us, if my initial feeling is like, whoa, that is so not something we would ever do, all I know is it's my biggest challenge. Like, well, how would we do it? How would we do it to make it look on brand?
That's very cool. And I can definitely relate to the fence sitting, if you will.
Yeah.
I did that for all 6 years at Home Depot. When I was an engineer, I felt like I was representing the product team to the engineering team. And when I was a product manager, I felt like I was representing the engineering team to the product team. And it was like I was working for the wrong team both times.
Oh,
and
I feel that every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was just this interesting environment where I basically work towards the goals of the team I'm on by trying to make sure that the team I'm not on is succeeding. It was very strange.
Truly. I mean, that is like a lot of why I think designers don't, really good, successful designers are actually going to be better relationship builders first and foremost than they are going to be designers. And I think designers who want to move forward in their careers have to be like relationship and like lay of the land understanders more than anything else. And in the beginnings of a career, the way I like to talk to my team to get them thinking that way is like, hey, let's say it's your first 2 or 3 months at American Eagle on my team. You're going to hear me say like, I know you're thinking about this aesthetically, and you're thinking about this from a friction standpoint. You're thinking about this from UX best principles, everything you've always learned in school or wherever. But when you show this in art review and you wonder where all the feedback's coming from and everyone feels emotional and passionate, it's because you are literally the first person who's ever taken the work of all these dozens of people, the copywriters, the photographers, the site merchants, the people who design the clothing. Like, it goes all the way up the product lifecycle chain, right? You're the first person who's actually putting all those pieces together in the first comp of what they will actually see when it hits the site. And so you're not just designing a thing, you're actually building a puzzle, and you're bringing someone else's work into like a visual plane with the 25,000 other pieces that it goes with for the first time ever. And that's why when people see things, they often tend to react, and it's passionate, and it's not ever really about the UX or about our work. It's about like a lot more than that, right? And so, like, yeah, you get it, being between two teams trying to be
sure.
the bridge. And I really try to get designers to think about that as like, you're representing all these other departments when you're putting their puzzle pieces together. One time I had a creative VP when I was on a more traditional creative team tell me that I was an in the box thinker, and I think he maybe meant it as an insult. And at first I was like, oh, that's okay. And then I was like, you know what, this guy is like doing campaigns, going on photo shoots, thinking about the next like idea that's going to get an Addy. I've never wanted to be that person. Like, I am an in the box thinker. I want you to give me a 1,000-piece puzzle and then take away 6 of the pieces, and I'm still going to give you something good enough to go to market. Like, that's what being a good frictionless designer is being given a kit of parts, breaking some stuff in the process, not having enough time to put the puzzles together, and still going to market with something functional that supports the business.
I like
So
that
I turned it
analogy.
into a compliment.
That's good.
For myself. Yeah.
That's good. It's like breaking down a digital device, and then as you're putting it back together, you have 3 screws left over, and you're like, I made it more effective.
Correct. Exactly. Exactly. I think that really also was a turning point for me, Chuck, to kind of go back to your prior question around how we end up in these niche moments or sectors of what we do that was not at all where we started our career or what we got trained to do. And I think that moment for me was this huge aha of like, oh, not all successful creatives end up going and doing campaign work. I can be successful over here in this other completely different track that's design, and there's validity to that. And of course, this was 10 years ago when I was having this thought. So like UX, UI, product management, they were all just becoming something that we were normalized and used to. So to see now that the industry go that way, where there are VPs of UX, it's incredible, because I think in the past, those UX people would have sat under a campaign VP and not really have their craft understood. And so it's really cool to see how the industry has changed that way.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. So when you think about balancing this design, analytics, and then the friction, because the friction is going to drive analytics, right? Because you're not just designing for designing's sake, you're designing and working on something that's going to produce revenue or not produce revenue for the company, right? How do you build a team to balance all of those? What does your team look like?
It's a great question. We have for the size of our business what I think is a pretty scrappy UX team. So I have a peer within our UX space who's the director of UX architecture, and he and I break our teams kind of down into half. So the UX architecture side of our team is really responsible for. I have an analogy for this too. It's important to have analogies in this business because if you're not in it, it's very hard to understand. But the analogy we use for this is like, go do the archaeological dig. Like, the architecture team goes and finds, hey, what are our friction points? They look at our internal tools. They look at our voice of the customer inputs. They look at third-party competitors. There's a lot of different ways we're doing that, like what's out there, what should we be chasing after, what do we have in our own house that is frictiony or problematic. So they unearth it. And then when we get we put it all in the backlog and we get it prioritized. And then when it gets picked up and becomes what we call a real project, something we're actually going to action on and the developer is going to have time and bandwidth to work on it, that's when my team takes it. That my team's that experienced design arm. So we're really taking a high level concept idea or that friction point that was found, and we're turning it into that final digital experience for site or app. So we've got designers on my side, we've got architects and researchers on that side, and then we also have a customer insights team too that's doing a lot more high level research at many, many different levels of the business.
Gotcha. And how are you measuring or quantifying that friction in the customer journey?
We use different tools. We've used a few in the past couple of years, but there's really nice, more user-friendly tools out there that allow you to pull your website up and actually see like where are people clicking, where are they not clicking, what point on the page are they scrolling to, where are they not getting to at all. I got an email this morning about where my counterpart Matt pulled up by working with our tool, like there's a bunch of people rage clicking on this modal because the click point on the X, the padding around it's not big enough, and they're clicking in the vicinity, but they're not hitting it. And so there's just a lot of frustration. So he was able to run a report and find that. Now my team doesn't have to get involved. Development's just going to go in there and make that pad bigger. But if we find something that's like, ooh, that's spicy, it's a way to look at our site. One of the things that, I love having a tool like that at our disposal because it solves a lot of those assumption conversations that waste a lot of time, right? Like, well, does anyone know how many people get down to that bottom of the page, or where's the scroll? Like if one more person says like, where's the fold on the page, or how far do people scroll? Like, it doesn't matter. Let's just look in this tool and see, hey guys, this button's really important. 70% of your traffic coming to this page is clicking on this button. We can't take the button off the page. And they're like, really? But that's not the purpose of the page. I'm like, I think the customer is telling you that the purpose of the page is that button if 70% of the traffic coming to the page is clicking that button, right? So sometimes it helps reframe internal storytelling, shorten internal storytelling, and help us make decisions a lot faster.
Gotcha. The data gives you the voice of the customer, basically.
Data gives you the voice of the customer that helps, kind of get some of those sticky conversations moving faster.
So how do you elevate these UX UI conversations to your leadership? Like what are ways that you tie your team's efforts, design, et cetera, to business outcomes so that you get the support you need from leadership?
When you say leadership, are you interested in hearing about like non-digital leadership or digital leadership?
Like non-digital, like the people, the budget holders. How do you get budget for the things you need to do? Let's put it in.
I don't have to do that. I have a really badass manager and she does that for me. I just get to do the work. At the end of the day, the way that they're managing the budgets, right, is like on the product management side. What's really nice about being on the experienced design team is like we get to be in the playground of like all the ideas. And that's great. But then of course, at some point, someone's going to come to you and be like, Catherine, that thing you're really passionate about, there's no money for. So I really think the trick has been that going back to that under the hood conversation. So a great example of this is if we're going to do enhancements to an area of our site or to one of our programs, and I know that's coming, I'm going to go to my digital leadership and say, hey, if we're going to go do this, I also want to redesign the whole thing or give it a glow up, as we like to call it internally. Give it that new coat of paint, that new design system overhaul while we're in there. And then that's where I've really learned to be impactful as a designer who doesn't own any kind of impact to the digital budget and those decision makings. It makes me feel like, over time I've learned my hands aren't tied behind my back. I can be very influential on those things that like, how is the money going to be spent is probably more where I'm really impactful. When it comes down to like, Catherine, we've got budget for one thing, be part of the conversation. Is it going to be A, B, or C? That's where I can like come in and really say like, you know, our money will go further if we do this. Or at the end of the day, even though I'm coming to it from like a design background, I want the best business outcome and I want the best outcome for our customer. And if those two things are congruent, it's usually a no-brainer. I'm going to be on the same platform as the product owner who's going to be saying and mirroring the same things I am, right? We're going to be in it together in that regard. It's easier to talk about getting leadership buy-in without bringing the money conversation into it because of the way we are structured. I don't have to go to bat for money specifically as a lead designer. What I'm going to bat for is the why. The why just is someone else maybe going to go ask for money, or
The storytelling.
the storytelling. So we've spent a ton of time over the last few years really being able to storytell, you know, why are some of these optimizations important? And I think the answer to all of our questions at the end of the day is A/B testing. Because in the past, you can get everyone really emotionally excited about a big bang project. And there's a win for the brand team, and there's a win for the digital team, and there's a win for the customer. And you're like, no brainer, everyone's in, this is great. And we work on it, and we work on it, we work on it, and we fight to get the budget to make it happen, and it happens, and that's awesome. But when you have a project where maybe not everyone's bought in right away, you don't have to work so hard at selling it up front. Like, well, let's just A/B test it and try it. And then you can say after the test, hey, we ran this test and I know half of the house wants to do this long-term and the other half doesn't, but let's have a conversation about it because maybe there's $10 million on the table under that decision then.
And then everyone's
Then the conversation really changes.
Yeah,
right.
When it comes to money,
and
it changes.
That's what's made my job most change so pivotally is with David coming in and bringing this really, we had an A/B testing culture before, but this is like very, very different. Like we test everything. It's changed my job, but in the best way, because now we have new challenges. And by testing so much, we're really able to, it goes back to that very first test I did 10 years ago. Like, do you care about the analytics behind your designs? We can see at the end of the year, wow, we made all these little tweaks and we didn't have to bring the entire organization along for every single decision. We just tested a bunch of things and see what works. And then where there might be sticking points or misalignments within the organization, we have a conversation like we would have in the past, but this time there's a dollar figure and it's a trade-off. So some things, they're not all in production. There are some winning tests that aren't in production today, and that's okay.
Sounds like the definition of continuous experience optimization right there.
Sure
well,
does.
It does, because we've also found too that the more we test, the more it's hard to separate tests from each other. So we've got like someone over here wanting to test how we talk to promos, and someone over here wanting to test how we speak to our equity names, and someone over here wanting to test how we run like detailed strings on our, and they're all wanting to do something in the same like inch by inch space on mobile. and so it's like, okay, wait, we actually need to design the end scenario, the dream for everyone, for ourselves, for what we want our experience to look like, that would then solve all three people's problems or challenges. And then we'll like incrementally find a way to test piece by piece into that outcome.
I like that
It takes
a
a long
lot.
time. It takes a long time.
Yeah, no, I can see the long arc succeeding though, because one of the things that you experience with A/B testing velocity is ultimately product bloat if you're not careful, where you're basically testing all these small incremental things at too fast of a pace, and you're validating each one is true in some capacity, and then you throw them all together, and the sum is not the same as the parts.
Well,
And
mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I'm still trying to crack that code. Like our velocity has increased so much in the last 12 months that I'm probably most suited to be the expert in the field of hey, do you want to talk about ramping up a very fast velocity A/B testing team in 0 time, like in a year? Where could you possibly be? That's where we are right now, right? Ask me in a year or 2 years where I am, and it's going to be in a completely different place. But just in the last 12 months, insane level of change and philosophy in the organization that has made us have to stop and say, we've never had so many tests running before that we've had to put them all together and realize that now this thing is bloated. And that's really my job, is to be like, hey guys, we're not going to like the outcome of all these things once we put them together. One of my favorite things to do that sometimes we do and sometimes we don't do is like take everything out, like an on and off. Like we have the most cluttered state on, strip it all back. Like everything you thought you needed, unless it's absolutely essential, it's gone. And then once you know which one, the cluttered one or the clean one wins, add things back one at a time until
That's
you get the right recipe for what's the balance. And then, that was one of the first things that we tested when David joined that was really, really impactful, was like, okay, yeah, we're not going to add all those things back in because then we won't know which one did it. We have to add them each back in one at a time and see which combination of the things together makes the right final outcome. There's no right way. Someday that's our MO one day, and then the next day we're like, no, do it the completely opposite way. And it's really just it's totally circumstantial.
No, it's a fun challenge that you're running into, though. It's one that only mature organizations can properly address. So it's really cool hearing you talk about it, because it gets over the political aspect of it, because there's so many people that have put something into every single little bit of the site that they have this personal ounce of emotion. And
Yep.
maybe that's all it is, but that's enough for them to go and defend that. No, you have to leave that. You can't take that away. It's worth 5 basis points.
Yep.
Or whatever.
Yeah. And what's really cool is that, when you have new energy come into an organization and change the way that you think, and then people start to say, oh, wow, this is working. I mean, it's an incredible thing to see it work and to see there are legitimate numbers behind this strategy of testing everything. And it also teaches you to break those assumptions, and that not everything you learned in design school ends up being true in the real world, or what may be true at Home Depot is not going to be true at American Eagle. So it becomes just like, let the money tell you, let the customer tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every digital experience, this is something we talked about in the Friction 5 recap episode, but every digital experience is based on your customers. Your customers. Mm-hmm. So what Amazon and Walmart and Target and all these other big brands, Home Depot and Lowe's and Abercrombie and Fitch, what they're doing doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Right. That's totally true. We talk about that a lot, and it's also created a lot of fun. I mean, there's still internal dialogue and internal debate, because maybe we're talking to, a vendor or something about doing AI, where typically we would have someone from the brand working on something. And there's passion. We're humans at the end of the day, designing these experiences for other humans. And so some people are like, yes, AI is amazing. And some people are like, I really don't want this test to win. And it's interesting that even internally, there's people who are rooting for it and people who are rooting against it. Me too. Every day we put stuff out there, tests out there, and every test we run, I have my own internal hope and dream and belief system. And then I'm like, okay, well, we'll just see. Right. It's cool. It's really cool.
But the data wins in the end. I got to tell you that method you just talked about stripping everything out one at a time, sounds exactly like food testing, food allergy testing. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what they do? You take it all out and then add one item back in.
It's exactly like that. That's such a good example. Yes. Yeah, it's just like that. Mm-hmm. I like that. I'm going to have to borrow that.
You're welcome to use that. So 2 last questions. What's a widely held belief about experience design that you fundamentally disagree with, that you think people get wrong?
I think designers and brand people are not going to disagree with me. They're going to be on the same side here. But digital and technology orgs can sometimes believe that the aesthetic doesn't matter. And Amazon is the reason for that, because most designers will tell you that Amazon's UI is old, it's clunky, it's not modern. And so design doesn't matter because they're the biggest in the world. But when you really get down to it, if you run a few tests where you put some variants in there where the aesthetics are less pleasing to the person in your org who thinks they're less pleasing, in this case, me, like whoever the brand police or the aesthetic police is, that's me. Usually, not always, but often, the aesthetics matter. And the brand, when you are at a lifestyle brand or anywhere where, you care about what it looks like at the end of the day, having a certain feel or emotion attached, that matters more. So I don't know if it's something that the masses would say, but I think that's where you get into really interesting debates between creatives and brand teams and marketing teams and digital technology orgs. It's a really fun place to play in between.
So then how did Craigslist become so successful?
Right? It's so ugly.
It's the
I don't
worst.
know. The other funny one is that people continue to read or to use Goodreads, and everyone loves Goodreads, but the internet is always making fun of how ugly the Goodreads app is. There are outliers out there. Not everything is aesthetically beautiful, but I think that in a lot of cases, it does matter. I think a lot more people would use Goodreads if someone redesigned it.
I can definitely resonate and represent that technology arm that does say aesthetics don't matter. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying aesthetics don't matter here because I do think a good look and feel matters a lot. But I would say that on instinct, that would be a tertiary at best aspect of what matters for the build of this. And so
Yeah, you guys
I
know
could
the analogy with the skateboard, right? The MVP. You know
go
that one?
through it. I
Okay.
do, but go through it.
Okay. It's been a while, but when you're having a debate, if you're going to build a car, don't build a car without three wheels that's ugly or without paint or with like scratches on the side. Build first a skateboard because it's still a vehicle, but it's smaller and you can probably paint the whole thing. And then turn your skateboard into a bike and make that a pretty bike. And it's going to go a little faster than the skateboard, but it's still going to be functional and beautiful and with a shiny coat of paint. And then you can turn your bike into a car. How'd I do?
I like it.
Yeah?
I've never heard it.
Okay. It's so that it's like you don't go to market with a car that's not like that maybe has four wheels, but like they all have different hubcaps and like 16 different coats of paint, one on each panel. That upsets your aesthetic person, but your rest of your team's like, it functions, it's fine. So we've come a long way because I haven't had to use that analogy in probably 10 years. And that used to be a hot topic. But that also reminded me of another one about aesthetic, Nick.
Although I'll
Never
say
mind.
that
Okay.
sounds like a knock on Apple's electric vehicle, but
Oh, I don't know. Is
development.
it?
Oh, you haven't seen? Yeah, they ended up scrapping it. It was one of those that
Oh,
it was too much. It was very much in your analogy of the
yeah.
skateboard to the
No,
car.
it feels very good to find, you know, um, to do the work, to bring, to be able to say like, hey, 10 years ago, we would have been having that conversation. That's someone's job in every organization, right? And it just happens to be my job. So I can look back and say, wow, our culture has really changed for the better because we have a respect for aesthetic and brand design across all of our departments now. 10 years ago, a wireframe that had no UI on it went to production because my UI team was literally just like usurped, forgotten. It was like, oh yeah, that looks great. Just put it up. So,
Wow.
you can come a really long way in 10 years. I also, the reverse did just happen. I just went like deep down I need a new app to manage my money. And because, Mint, the app went away. and Credit
Right.
Karma absorbed it, and Credit Karma is not as well designed. So I was like, I'm going to try Quicken. Simplify. It's beautiful, but man, it's the worst. So, I'm
Is
going to
that
use
Rocket
the other.
Money or something else? The actual
Um,
Quicken app or Rocket Money? Because
it's
Rocket
it's
Money is like blowing out.
no Quicken Simplify
Okay.
is.
Huh?
I mean, don't buy it. I spent the 20 some dollars for the year and I can't get a refund. And I don't like it as a functioning app. I don't like it, but man, it's very beautiful to look at. On the other hand, Credit Karma is a hot mess to look at, but it's doing all the same things for me that Mint did. So I'm overall happier with it. So, you can go either way in this debate, in this conversation. That's why it's heated. That's why it's heated. Both matter. Both matter.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I just the aesthetic side of things. I am definitely a look and feel at the heart of it. In terms of what I need. I mean, I created
I see
an
your
aesthetic
room.
right behind me
Yes.
because I care a lot about it. So when I talk about being a technologist that thinks of it in its side aspect, it's more that I find there's priority elsewhere, and it's less so that I find that there's no priority or no importance.
Yeah.
That's
I
all I
think,
wanted to add to.
well, and you're adding, I think you're adding a really important layer to this, which is like, it is so much less common in 2024 for technology orgs to not understand aesthetic and brand.
Right.
10 years ago, that was the conversation. But now so much has changed. Figma has really helped that, putting design in the hands of more people, making UX UI such a huge industry to begin with, where everyone's really respecting each other and each other's craft. Like, I've worked really hard with my counterpart on the front end UI development side, and he and I have made really great systems where our teams get out of Jira and actually have working sessions to look at code together and talk about why moving something one pixel to the left matters. And those might be small conversations in the moment, but when you look at it across a 10-year span, huge change in
Right.
culture and
Right.
lasting change in culture. And so that's actually the coolest part, is I don't have to have these debates very often anymore.
Yep.
So my hot take may not be that relevant anymore, because I think a lot more people are getting it.
Oh, I know people who don't, but yes.
Okay.
So do I. So do
All
I.
right.
I am Chuck. I am biting my tongue so hard right now.
Well, it's
Yeah,
funny
sorry.
too, because as the creative person in an org, you're also getting, like, there used to be a meme of a one designer sitting at a desk and there would be hovering art directors around. It's like when 15 people are watching one person design. It still happens today, but now you're just sharing your screen. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every week we're doing that at AE, right? You put your thing up on your screen and it's basically like, anyone who never went to design school can say anything they want about your design. And you're like, okay,
Well,
I'll
and,
try
and
it.
and a lot of people think they're designers, right? They think it's so simple, but they don't understand. There's a
And
lot
that's
of
because
science
they're all
behind it.
the end users. So as the end user using the product, the design is part of the product. That leads everyone to think that they have a stake in understanding or suggesting or having a point of view on what color, what font size, what font weight, how much spacing, and what ratio that thing's going to be. And that's where I think designers get really good, thick skin and get a good chuckle when the meeting ends or a good cry. It depends on the day.
What are 2 or 3 final recommendations you could leave with our listeners that they could take back to work tomorrow and start doing?
Are your listeners other designers, or are they mostly product people?
We do have a
They're
lot
all
of
over the
product
board.
people, but they are all over the place.
All over the
Yeah.
place. Okay.
And they're all impacted by UI and UX, right?
Okay.
They are.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Okay. The 3 things I would say are, your relationship building will get you much further than your design skills. That probably is most important in finding mutual respect in, like, if you're a product person, respect the designer's craft and vice versa, and understand each other's craft. And I have seen the difference between product teams where the UX, UI, and product little pod squad plus their core lead developer No friction. I mean, talk about frictionless experiences. If their relationships are good, they are putting so much out there so fast. And then on the other side, I've seen teams where it's just not there, or there's a rub, or there's not mutual respect, and they don't get anything done. And at the end of the day, it's like not that surprising, right? Sometimes we make a joke about like we need to do internal UX, like on our own system or on our own design processes. Like we're UX thinkers, do some UX on our internal process. And so that would be the number one thing. The other thing that I think is becoming more and more important that I think is important for both product and designers to remember is when you're looking at a Figma screen, a flat artboards next to each other, you're not replicating a real experience. So if you can advocate and get in the habit, or get your design partners in the habit of sending you a prototype to your phone that you can click, you're going to feel a lot better. If you're a designer listening to this, same. Like before you send it to your director or to your VP or someone to look at, put it on your phone. If you're not using Mirror, use it. Like even get your leaders to use Mirror. Like I love to have reviews with my team where I'm like actually looking at what they're showing me like this, instead of on a phone screen, embedded in my laptop screen, embedded in their WebEx shared screen on their screen. Like it's just not going to do the same thing, right? Like make it as real as you possibly can when you're going through your final design reviews. You catch like the smallest things. And then I guess my last thing would be, if you don't have an A/B testing culture and you're in a role where you don't feel like you're getting the opportunity based on what's coming up in your roadmaps to optimize very often, chase after an A/B testing culture, because the A/B testing culture will immediately put you in a world where you will get to continuously optimize. For years, I was trying to figure out how to, hey, we haven't optimized this page in a long time. When are we going to get to that? But optimizing wasn't like a project, right? It wasn't a big feature, because it was either, well, we have the budget for the feature or we can optimize. And optimizing isn't really new. But suddenly that thinking really changes when you bring A/B testing in. You're like, well, you're going to optimize every feature you design by testing a few different variations of it, and in turn you automatically optimize. So those would be the three things that I think are really most important.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Catherine. Where can listeners find you or connect with you?
That's a great question. Well, being a child of the internet, I'm all over the internet. I'm at Hey It's Me CG is my Instagram. My LinkedIn is my name. And then the retreat that I talked about earlier is jointheretreat.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Frictionless Experience. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player app so you automatically receive notifications when we upload new episodes. And be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you think and what topics you'd like us to cover. We're happy to cover anything that might be causing you friction. And of course, you can find and connect with me and Nick on LinkedIn.